So some of the things that you can try. First one is about setting strategic objectives and then just breaking them down into the shorter term work. So it's one of those things, it sounds extremely simple, but it's actually, you know, more complicated than that. And ultimately, what I found while I was kind of putting this content together is that I think this generally looks like creating an Agile roadmap. So I've got some good articles about Agile roadmaps as well that I can share afterwards, but that's why we've got all the information also on the right hand side. So I think ultimately the takeaway is create some kind of Agile roadmap, and here we've got the things that you can try and then what it means for your Agile roadmap. So that's kind of how the layout is designed. So thinking of your strategic objectives, making sure that those aren't just tactics and, you know, wrapped up in a bow and called a strategy, making sure that those are truly outcome led. So I've got a sort of illustration of this, that your objective or your goal could be that you need to fund a particular piece of research. That's an outcome. That's something that's, you know, connected to your cause. That's something you really want to achieve. Under that is a measure, would be, for example, that you've raised a particular revenue. Maybe it's the full cost of the research, or maybe it's a portion, and you've got other measures that are also going to contribute to that goal. What you will recognize if you've ever done OKRs, or objectives and key results, that's essentially what this layout is the goal would be your objective, the measures are your key results. Then under that, what you can start to really influence and manage are more like behaviors. So you're going to struggle if you've got a sprint where it's to raise all of the revenue needed to fund a piece of research. But what you can do is start thinking about how you can get more people to sign up, or you can get more new supporters, you could get more monthly gifts, that kind of example. So you would probably expect this to be kind of a triangle. You'll have a lot of behaviors that inform your measures and achieving those, and then you'll probably have several measures that will contribute towards achieving that ultimate goal. So in your roadmap, that looks like starting with those strategic objectives and then breaking those down into the kind of actual measures that you're going to aim for, and then the specific behaviors that you want to think about. In a general Agile sprint, those 2 weeks would usually be focused around a particular behavior, not as high level as a whole measure, just because you'd expect that to be a bit of a bigger piece of work. So that's how they all kind of fit together, and ways that you can try and manage the balance between, you know, you're rarely working in a purely Agile environment. There's often other things to consider. So one way that you can manage that and also manage other people's expectations and needs is using Agile friendly milestones rather than kind of deadlines or outputs. So rather than we will produce X document by X date, you think about we will have run this number of tests, or we will have found out enough information about this particular learning goal to make the next decision. Really thinking about things that you can actually commit to without committing to the content of what you will know or what you will be able to predict. So in your roadmap, again, that would look like tracking based on those milestones rather than particular outputs. And I've actually got an example of this working really well at Cancer Research UK. There was a person we were working with. She came from a project management background, so she really wanted like a project plan. And obviously you automatically think, oh no, that's not compatible with Agile. I can't tell you exactly when we'll meet particular points. But what we did was we just reset the kind of expectations. So I could tell her by this date, I will know this much more information, or we can make this decision, rather than her kind of original expectation. But it worked really well for both of us that we kind of met in the middle and had that compromise. So that also leads on to the next one, which is always sharing and checking and always improving your roadmap. It should be a work in progress and it should be a living document. So this is for your actual roadmap itself. It would be involving everybody, so outside of your team as well. So in that instance, that person who wanted the project plan was outside of my team. So I spoke to her about her needs and her deadlines and what she needed to know. And we created something that worked for both of us. Also evolving over time, the real sort of game changer for this is thinking of your long-term plans. You know what you might need to achieve in terms of, say, an annual plan, organizational strategy, but you don't know all the details of that. So the way I like to think of it is kind of, you have a zoom in on, you know, the short term, you know a lot more about the detail of exactly how that will work, and you've got more of a sort of sketch of what will happen for the longer term. And as you continuously learn more, you're improving and evolving your plan and adding in the detail that you need as you go. So you'll sort of get a longer, you'll have, say, let's use 12 months and 3 months, like quarterly cycles as an example. You'll have a really detailed 3 months, less detailed 6 months, less detailed 9 months, and then real basic 12 months. And as you move, the 3 months you're on will get more and more detailed. It's really important as well, especially in terms of communicating, would be to like visualize your roadmap. So I would use the example of Trello. Obviously there's other tools, but we do have the 2 examples that I've included in the board of both a sprint planning board and a more like roadmap higher level strategy board. And I would want to see those being used in combination. So really having a think about how your sprint has informed what is happening on your kind of strategy level board as well. A more tactical option is to use longer sprints. So we've got Ro from the Amnesty Human Rights Education team, and I know that they did this. They went for 4-week sprints. It means that you can actually track progress of a single piece of work in more detail, because you're not kind of stopping as often to kind of replan and reassess. So it might be you want to really get that piece of work done and plan all the work that needs to happen for that. Generally, anything more than 4 weeks, you're not doing an agile sprint anymore, but obviously you make it work for you, and it could be that you do a combination of shorter and longer sprints depending on the piece of work. Then I think the last 2 kind of go together, and they are maybe a little bit of a pushback on the whole concept of balancing the 2, which is that ultimately, if we're trying to work in an agile way, it's important that we do find the compromises, we do fit what we're doing into the system that we're in. But I think it's also important that we remember that there's things about that system that we can also change and improve. So I think just accepting, you know, very structured, very tactical annual plans or 5-year plans is not really compatible with Agile. And there's a lot of really great reasons why we want to work in this way. So remembering that there's also that kind of advocacy piece of spotting where those challenges are arising and how you might address them, and using that to try and really improve the wider system, as well as, you know, what's specifically happening within your team. So start with what you can control, but don't forget that improving the system is also really valuable. And one of the great examples that I have come across is at Prostate Cancer UK. They have recently started a new way of doing business planning, which is much more agile. And I've asked Chloe if she would mind just sharing a couple of bullet points about how it's different. I think it's a really, really good example.
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing to say is that that last point that Julie said is really important. We kind of had to start with what we can do, because this is quite a big change for us. So we're definitely not there, but it's a really, really good start. So the first thing we've kind of done is we're moving from kind of quite a structured 12-month yearly business planning structure to a rolling plan. So we are now looking at kind of an 18-month rolling focus, where we will have an idea of what we want to achieve in that 18 months. We have an objective against that, but we will have the detail for the first quarter and not much past that. So that's kind of our first thing. That's quite a big difference. We have to obviously budget for our 18-month objectives, and we also have to have a view of the 3-year kind of plan for our trustees as well. But the detail of how we're actually going to do that, we're only going to look at the quarters. There's a couple of things with this. The way that we used to do it used to be quite a rigid year based on the financial year. We used to find ourselves in February and March scrambling around because we hadn't really planned for the new financial year in April. We never really used our budgets properly towards the end of the year because we kind of got to a point where we hadn't kind of planned going forward the next few months. So everyone was grabbing onto budgets and spending, and it didn't really work properly. So hopefully this will enable us a bit more to kind of always be thinking about the next step, which is great, and people, especially in the leadership team, can really get behind that. But also not spending loads of time focusing on the future. I think we've all seen, especially the last year, that things can change so much so quickly. So it feels like we've kind of got a really good reason to do this. We can't plan 18 months ahead in perfect detail. So that's one thing. Second thing, we're going to be reviewing it every quarter. So we've got to that kind of first stage that Julia was just talking about. We've kind of set our objectives. We're now looking at our key results, and we'll be reviewing them quarterly. We'll be reviewing them in planning groups, which is also a new thing. So we now have cross-organisational planning groups. They have a leadership team sponsor who kind of manages the group in a way, but they have people from all over the organisation that can feed into these planning groups, and they directly respond to our 7 organisational objectives and aims. So that's really exciting. It means that it's not just leadership team doing business planning. It means that it's executives across the charity and people in different teams. It's not set by directorates, so that's really exciting. Although that's what's hard work at the minute, because we have to get these things in the diary and it's stressful. And then the other thing is that all of our objectives and key results are coming from a place that has already been agreed, which is this big like step change we need to make as a charity to get to our next kind of level. So they've started from a really good place this year, instead of it starting from like just directorates saying, okay, as a fundraising directorate, what do we want to do over the next 18 months? We want to raise X, and then just going for that. It's kind of thinking about that purpose piece and going, okay, we want to invest X in research because our aim is to create a world where lives aren't limited by prostate cancer. So in order to do that, we have to invest in research, and in order to do that, we have to raise money, instead of kind of just directorates being really focused on what they need to achieve. So they're kind of our big things that we're changing. I know that's a lot of information, so I'm happy to take questions if there's time, or email me or whatever. But I will say it's really new for us. We're in our first couple of weeks of like getting these planning groups together, so it's in its early stages, but it's really exciting and it should be really, really great, hopefully. But there's a lot of learning to be done, and it's a lot of me and Gareth, who is our director of tech and transformation, working with the leadership team and these planning groups. So it's quite time intensive, but it is worth it in our opinion. Hope that was enough, Julia. Let me know if there's questions.
I think that was great. I can see a question from Simon.
Thanks, Chloe. That was really interesting, and it really resonates with the conversation we were having here at Unlimited yesterday, actually. And I was just wondering, you touched on it briefly, but the level that you bring the key results and OKRs into. So, and just if you could say, yeah, hear a bit more about what type of measure you've used for the different horizons in that process.
Yeah, so this is something I've worked with Julia on. So we have 7 aims as a charity, and they're things like all men are aware of the risks of prostate cancer, something like that. It's really broad. And then we've got them, each of those planning groups, to go, okay, so that's our big aim. That might take 10 years, we don't know. But what's the urgency in that aim, and what do we need to focus on in the next 18 months? That becomes our objective. So for example, in that one, it might be that some men at high risk know about the risk. So it's really the urgent bit of it that we need to nail. That's our 18-month objective. And then within that, okay, so to get some men, that are at high risk, to know about their risk or to know about the disease. What do we need to do now? And then they're the measures. So it's kind of like we have something that's called a risk checker. It's like, okay, so we need to measure that currently we have 10% of men using it. We want that to rise to like 40% of men use that risk checker who come on our website. Something like that. But this is kind of we're doing workshops in these next couple of weeks to find out those key results. So it's quite hard, is what I'd say, this first step, because high level key results feel really alien to me. I've been used to like projects where I can say the ROI increases to 3 to 1, and that feels really measurable. This is, the more high level it gets, the more difficult I feel it gets to measure. But it's definitely a work in progress. I hope that's helpful.
Really like to
That's
just
great, thank you.
add to that as well, the difficulty of measuring impact in that way. But I think it's really useful as someone who's really interested in impact measurements is the kind of the false security that you can get from really clear impact measurements. So, you know, your ROI might have changed, but actually, have you really achieved that objective? You still don't know, but you've just got this kind of this ROI that makes you think you know. So I think what you're getting to is more accuracy, even though it feels quite uncertain and quite scary.
Yeah, definitely.
Were there any other questions for either me or Chloe? No? Okay, brilliant. And as Chloe said, I'm really happy to answer any questions or share any